Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to this Levy B round. I don't know what stage of the Levy B this is. I apologize. Okay, I'm going to introduce myself. I'll let you all introduce yourselves. Give me names, speaking order, pronouns if you want to disclose, and also your timing. My name is Maya. I will be your one and only chair for this evening. I use they, them pronouns. Also, do let me know, I'm taking my notes on my computer, if there's a particular color you want your team to be in my notes or you specifically as a speaker. So starting with government, whenever you're ready.
So Yuvika, she, their pronouns, I'll be speaking first.
Ashia, she, her pronouns, speaking second.
Are you guys doing PMR or PMRE?
Yuvika, I guess.
Yeah, 6'4". So I don't know what that is.
PMRE. Thank you.
Okay, that.
Okay, nice. Opposition.
Hey, I'm Fawn. I use she, they pronouns. I'll be speaking first. We're doing split off.
Hi, I'm Ben. I use here they pronouns, speaking second. If you could put what I say in pink, I'd be really happy. Or if you have like anything close to lilac as well, either.
I got you. Okay, great. If nobody has any questions, without further ado, I invite the Prime Minister up to deliver their speech. I'm also going to encourage everybody to keep their own time, but I will also keep time myself and send it into the chat.
All right, so I'm going to time myself, and if anyone has any questions, please say it verbally or scream. Just don't put it in the chat because I'm not going to be able to look at it. All right, then. Okay. So I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, the motion before the House reads, this House is the Democratic Party would pack the court. The way we've chosen to model it is currently under the status quo. We see that this is not a simple majority, like there's not a balance of conservatives and liberals in the court, where we have like a 6-3 balance of 6 being conservative parties, people with more conservative ideologies, and like we have like a lack of liberal judges in the Supreme Court. So what we're going to do is we're going to pack the court to the extent that this balances out, and that to the extent that liberals have or not the liberals, oh my god, so confusing, Democratic Party has a simple majority in the court. The appointment process is going to look like what it looks like under the status quo, so that's not going to change. The only thing that's going to change is the number of Supreme Court judges that align with a certain political ideology. All right. So the main reason that we want to do this is to promote, firstly, to serve better justice. Secondly, to like depoliticize the court, and that it's going to be a balance of ideologies in the court. Thirdly, because like it is more likely for us to have like judges whose values align with that of the Democratic Party. And finally, it counterbalances the lifelong service on the Supreme of the people in the Supreme Court. All right, so on to my first point. Firstly, how it's going to make the courts less biased and politicize the court. Recognize that under the status quo, we have like a 6-3 balance of Supreme Court judges. And as a result of that, what happens is that most of the time, the kind of rulings that are made, or the kind of policies, not the policies, but the kind of rulings that are made, or the kind of judgments that are made, they mostly align with a certain political party, right? What happens when we do change this kind of number such that we have a simple majority and like a balance of political ideologies, you're more likely to see like depoliticization of court less bias, such that it's not going to like align with a certain kind of ideology. We're more likely to see like a lot of discussions and come to like come to not right now, later, please. More likely to see policies that are a result of discussion, and like both the parties are able to, people with different ideologies are able to offer their perspectives, and as a result, we're gonna like less likely to see policies that only depend on the kind of party that is ruling in that time. That this allows for better justice to be served, because like right now we see that a lot of the rulings are likely to be that of conservative ideology, which also allows for like reversal of policies, reversal of democratic or liberal policies that we've had in the past. As we've seen like in the news right now, we're seeing a lot of reversals of these policies, which is like the less inclusive policies, which means like it's worse for a lot of people, or worse for like the LGBTQ community, and like justice is not being served essentially, right? All right. Secondly, we tell you that this is much more relative to the status quo. This means like in the Supreme Court, we're more likely to see, since a balance of ideas, we're more likely to see a better representation of liberal ideas of the Democratic Party, which is not something we see under the status quo. What does that look like? This looks like a balance of people, wherein like at least half of the people are like, let's say, pro climate change policies that address the climate change issue, for LGBTQ policies, like policies that are more inclusive, more equitable for people, and this allows for like better representation of the people, of the minorities on the Supreme Court, because like in this case, more policies that are more inclusive them, not policy rulings that are inclusive them, are likely to be passed. Okay, I'll take a POI if anyone has any right now.
Okay, so the crux of your argument lies on the idea that essentially, if it's more balanced, it's going to be a less like partisan court. The court has essentially been balanced to essentially like 4-5 for like basically the past 100 years, and it's still been like highly politicized and highly partisan. How just by like having 2 more justices is this arguably going to fix the system purely through having an ideological balance?
So I think we're just going to talk about the past couple of years. We're not trying to fix the system itself. What we're trying to achieve is like more equitable policies, more policies that where we just don't see the reversal of policies that have been passed in the past. What we're trying to see is like policies that are better policies that are preserved for the public, and not just like these policies being reversed because of like higher conservative representation on. So we want to see, like, if a policy is passed, we want to see it being maintained as opposed to like it being reversed if there's a high representation of a certain party. All right. Thirdly, how it counterbalances the lifelong service on the Supreme Court panel. So like currently under the status quo, in the past, what we were seeing is like essentially people get to like serve on this panel for their entire lifetime, and in the past we've seen like we've seen like a higher conservative representation. As a result, what happens is that these individuals with like concrete with set conservative ideologies are able to serve on these panels for like a long amount of time, and as a result, what happens is that the kind of not just opinions, but like the kind of ideas that they hold, the kind of values that they hold that are like outdated, that are not like necessarily inclusive, are able to persist because they're not being we're not having any modern representation of like more younger judges, or like just like judges who understand what the modern society needs, or understand what the Americans today need, are not able to serve on the panel because of that. So under this under our model, what we see is that not necessarily younger, but like people are able to be appointed and like able to have a chance in spite of these individuals like having had the chance to opportunity to serve for like a lifetime without worrying about like being repealed, etc. So these reasons we're proud to propose.
Okay, I think that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open up the op case.
Sorry, give me a second. Okay, so I'm going to be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think it's really important here to consider that as we are the Democratic Party, what are the goals of the Democratic Party, and what is the most sustainable political solution in terms of ensuring that the Democratic Party's goals are going to be met in both the short term and the long term. And I think, and on-site opposition, we think that there are 2 fundamental flaws with the case that government has presided as. First of all, there is no real clear kind of differentiation between how exactly the numbers of like the Supreme Court judges would actually necessarily institute longer political change in terms of depoliticizing it. I think that Ben already points this out in his POI, and I think our response to this is the fact that the Republic, as long as the Senate still is being controlled by the Republicans, it's going to be very, very difficult to have Supreme Court nominees even be accepted in the first place, right? And even if this was feasible, and even if this was true, we think that this is an unsustainable political strategy because it hinges upon the fact that you have to depend on winning the election first and actually getting the presidency in order to actually have this nomination happen, right? So we think that insofar as that is true, it is an unsustainable political strategy to focus on packing the court when instead it is much more important to focus on getting candidates in Congress, getting candidates in Senate in the first place, where the legislation happens in the first place. I think that this is also the second response in terms of the role of the Supreme Court and the role of the legislation and how this plays together in sustaining the Democratic Party's power. Okay, so and what we heard about how this idea that there's long Supreme Court judges it's right now unbalanced, and how a lot of conservative judges are usually there for a long lifetime, and we need to give opportunities to younger judges. Again, recognize that this is only possible in terms of the presidency being one, but also the fact that the reforms to the Supreme Court are still possible without increasing the traditional number over what it is right now. And we think that it goes into our constructive case about, one, the harms of packing the court and how this leads to a delegitimization of the Democratic Party, and how this delegitimization is a key mechanism for losing elections, and how this can actually give much more power and influence to the Republican Party in the long term. How is this true, and how does this happen? Okay, so we can see that right now, one of the Republican strategies is constantly accusing the Democratic Party of being corrupt, of not respecting democratic processes, right? And we think that insofar as you use packing the court as a strategy, it is a very overt and visible way for the Republicans to be able to point fingers and say, look, the Democratic Party is not respecting the fact that the Supreme Court is supposed to be actually bipartisan, right? And we think that even though there's this idea that right now things are already unbalanced in favor of the Republicans, look, we think that in the long term the Republicans are never going to actually fully admit this publicly, right? We don't think this is feasible or likely in their interest to do so. We think that it's much more likely that they will co-opt this narrative, even if the Democrats only add so much judges so that there's an equal level between the two. We think that it's still much more likely the Republicans are going to use this to co-opt this in the next campaign cycles and elections to say, look, the Democratic Party doesn't actually care or respect the process of democracy at all. And we think that also this just sets a bad precedent in the long term in terms of allowing for when Republicans get into the presidency or the Republicans get power, this idea that packing the court is a good feasible way to achieve your goals in the long term. So we think that insofar as that is true, it is also just overall a bad strategy in that case. So what is this comparative here? What I want to talk to you a bit more about now about what is the better political campaign and strategy, right? Okay, so it's comparatively much better to focus the Democratic Party's resources into just getting more candidates into Congress and or better promoting candidates during the presidential campaign so that there's a more and there's more cohesiveness in that. Why is it more important to have more Democratic members in Congress? Because that's where the laws are actually being made, right? We think that insofar as packing the court is only going to be a band-aid solution to what happens if, for example, Congress is dominated by the Republicans, right? We think that it's a much better and easier check to focus on having Democratic congressmen that can speak out against bills and that can actually have votes on the floor in terms of which bill is being passed. And status quo right now is actually the Democrats who have control over the Congress. And so we think that it's much more important to focus on sustaining that and keeping that rather than this damage control mechanism of let's just balance out the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is only supposed to interpret the laws and how it's enforced, right? They're not actually the ones who are creating the laws, and they're actually making those laws. And we think that insofar as that is true, it is much more important to not only keep the Supreme Court number to the same as it is right now, but it's also much more important to focus on these campaign strategies, because the reality is there's also going to be moderates who are going to believe, who already are suspicious and think that the Democratic Party is elitist, right? There's already people that are willing to switch. And so insofar as we need to convince those people to vote for the Democratic Party in the next election, this is why legitimacy and this is why reputation is instrumental, because the way that this issue is going to be covered and the way that the Democratic Party is going to be seen is going to be instrumental and like heavily weighed in the election cycle. And insofar as the only real way to ensure long-term policy change is to have those like policymakers in Congress actually be Democratic in the first place, we think that this is also like the reason why there's necessarily a separation of power in the United States, right? Like there is a reason why the Supreme Court is supposed to be bipartisan. And any moves that the Democratic Party makes to try and like swing it towards their favor, even to swing it towards a balanced favor, is going to be viewed as an attack on this institution. And that is like the most important thing that you need to weigh in this round. Okay, so I think that so far, like what we've explained to you is like first of all, the goals of the Democratic Party and like how this is like likely going to be achieved, and also like just the harms of like using the packing the court as a political strategy in terms of like achieving longer term change. And we think that yeah, so like insofar as this is true, I think it's just important to kind of like focus on getting candidates and like supporting candidates on the ground in terms of primary elections whenever they get whenever that's election cycle comes around, and to kind of like, because the fundamental difference here is that congressmen are like congressmen and congresspeople are expected to be partisan. They're expected to advance the interests of their parties publicly, and this is not going to be like taken as an inflammatory manner. But Supreme Court justices are inherently not supposed to be political, right? And so this will actually only further politicization of the Supreme Court, and it will further delegitimize the Democratic Party, and not only have bad political outcomes in the short term, but also in the long term. And that is why we are so proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for those remarks. I want to remind people that like you should offer POIs. They make debate zestier. But without further ado, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case for Gov.
Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, done in 3, 2. Panel, first thing I'd like to do for you today, I'm going to do a couple of things. One is that I'm going to characterize what actually packing the Supreme Court would look like and why that's important, and why that's particularly important for some of the really bizarre things that are happening right now in the United States, and like why this would particularly be useful, and how even if this is not the ideal circumstance, like even if like ideally there are lots of things we could do in the long term to try to like make Democrats more like represented in various ways, how this is something in the short term we definitely need, and how this is something that in the long term still benefits us, but in the short term we absolutely need, when people in the Supreme Court right now are discussing trying to do things like overturn like abortion rights and like opposing like change that would like actually meaningfully like oppose like climate change and like actually deal with like very pressing issues that are like in the short term have to be dealt with. Why like I'm going to characterize like why that's important, and then what I'm going to do after that is just like refute some of the main things that come out of op, and then do some rebuilding of my partner's case. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just do some like very like important characterization, right? What we brought up in our model was that we're not looking to have like the Democrats like bring in a bunch of like Democratic Supreme Court justices, like an indefinite amount. We don't care about that. What we care about is having the president or like whatever, I don't understand the US, but like the president or whoever elects these people to be able to elect the number of Supreme Court justices required to meet a simple majority of Democrats with, or like Democratic nominated of Supreme Court justices within the Supreme Court, right? Why is this important, right? We think that like the main reason why things like this are important at the moment under the status quo is because the kind of things that are going on within the Supreme Court right now are deeply politicized in a way that is like inherently extremely progressive. I think what this looks like is like people right now being really scared of things like Roe v. Wade being like messed with, like things like, you know, like abortion access being like denied, transgender medical access being you know, like the policies around that changing, things like the Supreme Court like not like, you know, Supreme Court's like the Supreme Court not like ruling in favor of like actions that are supposed to like promote like the fight against climate change, things like that. What we have to accept is that the inherent system of the Supreme Court is one that is deeply politicized in the first place. A system in which like the president like elects a person and they serve for the rest of their life. This is a deeply politicized system to begin with, right? If we're not under this motion tackling that, there's everything that Op says about like, you know, trying to depoliticize or whatever, like opposing like our case, like doesn't stand, because the whole point is that the only thing that we are offering by doing this is actually allowing the Democrats that are in the Supreme Court to have a fighting chance to actually protect like the current like changes that have been made, like progress that has been made as a result of Supreme Court rulings, giving them a fighting chance to actually keep these in place, and having people like not having enough people within the Supreme Court to vote in favor of things and like prevent that certain like Supreme Court rulings to be like overturned, whatever, right? So like we think that the pressing need for this comes from the moves right now being made within the Republican Party of actually trying to genuinely overturn really important progress, right? So like this is where I think like a lot of that refutation comes in, like why Op's case is like fundamentally flawed in terms of understanding what's going on right now. Op brings up a lot of things about how like it's important to have like we need to focus our resources on like getting more like Democrats into federal government, and like the Republicans will be like really angry if you have like more, if you're trying to get like more Democrats into the Supreme Court, because then they're going to say that this is democratic like corruption or whatever. But none of this matters if the Republicans in the Supreme Court right now are trying to like deny people basic human rights, trying to reverse people's like access to their human rights. This doesn't matter. The perception of the Democratic Party within the context of like the Supreme Court and what it's capable of doing at the moment is not the most pressing issue. What is the most pressing issue is protecting the things that like the Supreme Court is actually meaningfully able to achieve, which is like proving constitutionally why people's rights are supposed to be protected, why like certain things should be done, why like certain cases are like are ruled in favor of or ruled against. The only way that this can be achieved is if there is a balance between like, if there's more of a capability of a balance between the Democrats and the Republicans within the Supreme Court, right? And like because we're talking about only having a supreme like a simple majority, like this is much more achievable in this way, right? Like we don't think anything about like corruption in the Democratic Party and like the like criticisms about that, like none of that matters if like the Supreme Court, because there's like 6 conservatives and 3 Democrats, is able to like deny a bunch of people access to like reproductive rights in their country, in their states. But like yeah, so we don't think that this matters. We think that this is like very like this is very like surface level analysis on that level, where it's like it doesn't matter what the Republicans think of Democrats, they're not going to like them anyway. We think that it's more important to like protect people's access to basic human rights, right? But like also on their point of like having more Democrats in federal government and why this is important, like have moving resources into like trying to get more like Democrats into power is not mutually exclusive to packing the court in any way. These both presumably both of these things could be done at the same time, even if it's an argument of like trying to move resources. We think that like one, if we're assuming that like democratic processes are the ways that Democrats are elected into power, the assumption here is that like that people decided this, right? The American public decided that the Senate like how the Senate was kind of like split up, right? People voted these people into power. This is assuming that like voter fraud and things doesn't exist, right? But like if these things do exist, in either case, right, there's very little that can be meaningfully done to change the way people's voting patterns and change the access that people have to like to I'll take you in a second, the access people have to like the access Democrats have to like to power, besides like voting cycles. Their resources can be dedicated to trying to counteract things like voter fraud, whatever. But but like while this can happen, like while resources can be put in that way, it is much more of a like actually like direct possible like it's much more directly impactful to be able to elect more Democratic Supreme Court nominees, because it's a much more direct impact against like a lot of these things that are currently happening in the Supreme Court that are like reversing progress. Okay, so just to like quickly rebuild one like my partner's case, one, it's important for us to pack the court because it allows for us to have more justices that align with the Democratic Party and therefore like balance out the court. That allows for like a lot of like protection from the things that the Supreme Court is trying to do right now, which is like reverse a lot of like really important progress. It counterbalances a lot of the like lifelong leadership policies by like actually having more Democrats in power, not having like Republican Supreme Court nominees who have been elected like 40 years ago, who are just there because they're old. Like it allows for more like representation and like and things like that, and it allows for like more variety because there's a larger Supreme Court. That's it for me. Thank you.
I think that's beer for those remarks. Call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to further the case for side out.
Okay, so currently what we see, and I think this is agreed on both sides of the benches actually, is that currently you have a Supreme Court that is incredibly partisan. Now, what do we try to do on the other side? What we're trying to do is, yes, we agree with reforms to actually like, limit the, the terms of Supreme Court justices and making it depolitical. But what the issue is with packing the court, it is a partisan way of solving a partisan issue. See, the issue is that short term, yeah, you might like stop Roe v. Wade of being, turned over in the next like 10, 20 years. That doesn't stop it after that, especially as saying that, first of all, there's probably going to be one time that we're even going to be able to pack the court, seeing as the Senate is mostly held by Republicans, especially seeing there's a greater divide between rural and city electors. So there's probably going to be since there's more rural states, there's going to be probably more Republican senators in the Senate than there are Democrats. So it's going to be harder to actually get in Democrat judges in the first place. And see, I think that's the main issue. Is what they do not recognize on the government side of the bench is that what they're doing is simply a short-term band-aid solution. By packing the court, what you're just doing is opening the door for like more Republican justices. Already we have a system where it is based upon this ideological balance. And what we see is that political opportunists, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, what they're doing is they're pushing through Republicans because they can, because it's simply based on like this balance, this agreement. If it's not legal, you can tear apart these agreements really easily. By just adding 2 more justices, you're not going to solve this. And seeing as the Senate is and actually presidency, both of the positions that matter here in getting through justices are predominantly held by Republicans most of the time. If they are held by Democrats, they're held by like predominantly moderates. We're seeing that we're not actually getting these protections that are going to help people's human rights. And also on that point of human rights, since this House is the Democratic Party, I would argue that our main goal should not be like protecting human rights, but electing Democrats, electing future Democrats. I'm not saying that the Democratic Party doesn't care about human rights, but as a large establishment Democratic Party, as like a large establishment party, the emphasis is more on getting more power so they can, at least have the perception of protecting human rights and like actively trying to stop overturning things like Roe v. Wade. First of all, it's going to be very hard to just overturn something that is like a very long, almost like 50-year coming up, political precedent. But also in the same term, Democrats are also, since it's such a highly partisan issue, the Democrats are just appealing to their base, Republicans are appealing to their base. So actually like the overturning of Roe v. Wade and stuff like that is probably largely just going to be like on either side of the political spectrum. So it might be like a win for Democrats if they stop it. Once again, it's not going to appeal to them Republicans. Since we are the Democratic Party, what we want to do is we want to actually appeal to moderate voters. Why the hell are they putting Joe Biden as, their nominee for the election if they don't want to appeal to moderate and rural voters? That is the goal of the Democratic Party. What we provide you on side opposition that we don't believe government does it all is we actually provide you an actual characterization of what the goals of the Democratic Party are. They're not to simply just like, oh, make a better, fairer world. They're for Democrats to win. Sure, I'll take you because POI.
Yeah, I'm very confused why choosing to why deciding to like have more Senate representation and packing the court are necessarily mutually exclusive.
Okay, so I think firstly, it's not just like Senate representation, it's just general representation in the House, though I think the Senate is key to that. Why I think this is mutually exclusive, because the role of the court, I think, is often like more politicized, and it's an unelected position. First of all, electoral, Supreme Court justices, rather, they have like, most of the time, like 20-year terms. You have decades of control and legal precedents that are often more than laws. Laws can be repealed relatively easily. We've seen this over the past 4 years with the Trump administration, especially the first half of the term where Republicans held both houses. You can them through, just having the presidency through executive orders, but also you can just repeal laws like crazy. It's a lot harder to overturn a political precedent. And so if you don't have like a depoliticized, a less partisan Supreme Court, which we do argue we should have, we just don't believe doing it through packing the court because it can be later manipulated by Republicans. We believe it's actually like a lot easier to, just get in legislation through the House than it is to like overturn these large legal precedents. Additionally, we also just don't think that the Senate, is going to be foreseeably something that is going to turn Democratic for a very long time. So like, let's look at the Senate right now. First of all, I've already talked about like this city rural shift, which is actually, if anything, becoming more polarized, becoming more extreme if we're following current trends. But also the only way in the foreseeable future that Democrats will have like a reasonable long-standing majority or even like supermajority in the Senate is if they do one thing. If they get through the statehood of Washington, D.C., like the Douglas Commonwealth or Puerto Rico. That is like the most foreseeable way that's going to happen. And first of all, this doesn't have full Democratic support. Though it passed through the House, it is hard to believe that you have like a lot more like, moderate Democrats that appeal to like West Virginia and things like that in the Senate. It is hard to believe that those things are both going to get passed. Additionally, those are things that once again are going to be seen by the Republican Party and Republican voters as things that is corrupt, is trying to like manipulate the system to appeal to Democrats. As we've seen in both the debates, both Donald Trump and Mike Pence have been pushing this narrative of that, first of all, they're mad that like, they're pulling Amy Coney Barrett. Democrats are mad that, Obama didn't win again or whatever. They don't, they're just saying that what they're trying to do is because they're sore losers is getting in and packing the court. This is the narrative that they're already mounting against Joe Biden. This is why they're fabricating this question for Joe Biden to answer the question if he's going to pack the court. Like they're creating a political issue about packing the court. This is a Republican narrative. So this narrative is already established. It's building off the established of like crooked Hillary, crooked Nancy Pelosi. The whole thing is Democrats is like this large elitist crooked party, who eat children or whatever the fuck QAnon says. This is an established narrative about a bunch of Republican voters. So it is hard to believe that like if they do this, if they get in, the statehoods of Puerto Rico and Washington D.C. so they can actually have like future Senate majorities most feasibly, it's hard to believe that that narrative won't be used against them, which will actually lead to probably loss in the House, loss in the presidency. Once again, our goal as a Democratic Party is to defend Democratic legislatures, to defend Democratic power. We want more Democratic presidents. We want more Democratic legislatures. It is more easy to pass legislation than it is to set legal precedents. If you get somebody in the White House, you can pass executive orders. That should be our main goal. This will delegitimize our party. If we pack the court, it will be seen as a corrupt move. Not only that, it's a short-term band-aid solution to, fixing the Supreme Court. It's going to be probably easily manipulated by Republicans in the future because they do oftentimes have greater majorities in the Senate. And we see even if we do try to change that, it will just only further lead to the delegitimization of the Democratic Party. It's a rock and a hard place. So that's why we see really the only feasible way to do this is through push greater for Democratic representation in the White House, in Congress, and also have moves like limiting short-term legislatures, putting in, not short-term judges. Additionally, probably putting in like a supermajority to elect Supreme Court justices, 60%, probably need more Democratic support that way to get it through. The measures like this that will directly lead to the depolarization rather than using like a partisan tool to make something less partisan. We see that as, first of all, a non sequitur and something that's only just going to shoot the Democratic Party in the foot in future.
Thank that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the opposition whip to close out the op bench. Fong, you're muted.
I just realized. Let me restart. Lol. At least it was only like 2 seconds in. Okay. My bad. Give me like 2 seconds. Okay. I'm gonna be starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, we think that the most important thing that side opposition has brought to you today is one, the more likely characterization of what happens, and two, the importance of why is it mutually exclusive that we focus on like getting candidates into Congress over impacting the court, and why is perception necessarily important, and why this matters in this round. We think that first of all, again, as my partner explained, it is extremely difficult to overturn like legal precedents, right? Like just the sheer number of like Republicans to Democrats isn't actually like doesn't matter as much if you consider the fact that, look, there are other ways that Republicans are undermining like reproductive rights, right? Like there is anti-abortion laws that say that clinics have to close down because their hallways are like not wide enough for like a stroller to be pushed through and things like that. That type of legislation is still being pushed through, and that happens in Congress, that happens in the House. That is not the root of the actual problem of what happens when we allow, like when we don't focus on the right things, right? Like those policies are still going to be pushed through if we allow like our main political strategy to be through packing the court instead of through focusing on getting candidates elected into Congress, to getting them elected into the Senate, right? As we've already mentioned, and as Gov conceded, it's going to be inherently politicized because it is based on a nomination, it's not based on election. So it's a much smarter strategy to focus on like pouring resources into election and convincing the people, the American people, to vote for the Democratic Party and to trust the Democratic Party again. And they cannot do that if they're getting like this narrative that the Democratic Party does not respect like democratic processes and that it's trying to like co-opt the Supreme Court. And as we also explained to you, there's a fundamental difference between pushing for candidates in Congress and pushing for bills for the Democrats in Congress because it is expected to be partisan, because it is how democracy works, versus trying to co-opt this like Supreme Court, which is already like supposed to be seen as a too politicized institution. That is the key inherent difference. The Republicans are going to spin, it's going to be much harder for the Republicans to spin that Democrats are being partisan if it's working through the Congress versus if they're trying to pack the court. Okay, 2. And on why perception is important. Again, as we've explained to you why. In order to actually achieve the laws that we want, in order to actually achieve power and to like protect the human rights that Gov tells us they care so much about, it's important to get people into Congress, into Senate, into elected positions where they're actually creating that legislation, right? And this is not possible if the American people do not want to vote in Democratic candidates because they're seen as corrupt, because they are seen as people who don't respect democratic processes. This is why perception is important. And it's important in the short term too, because in the short term, there's already laws that Republicans are making to try and repeal rights. And that's why we need to get people into Congress faster. And that's what we need to like start campaigning from the very beginning. And that's why those things are mutually exclusive, because we have a limited time frame. We have a limited amount of time in order to protect those rights. And we have demonstrated to you so far inside Opposition why in this short time frame, it is better not only in the long term and the short term to focus on getting candidates into Congress. And this is why we are so proud to oppose.
Okay, I thank that speaker for those remarks and call upon the government whip to close out this round of debate.
Sweet. All right, just give me 1 second to set up my timer. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hang on, no. I'm pressing. All right. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, what we've seen in the arguments presented by the opposition is that a lot of their arguments rest on the assumption that we're going to use this as a political campaign strategy. But however, this is not how we choose to see as the Democratic Party. This is an action that we're going to take, not necessarily to choose to have it as a political campaign strategy. We can recognize that the current narrative, as has been rightly pointed out by the opposition, might hurt our chances of getting re-elected, which is obviously one of our goals as a party who wants to represent the American population. Secondly, I want to clarify why the current narrative of how packing the court might be seen as a current move. This is because it has not been clarified by our party yet how many whether we're gonna want a simple majority on the court, or how whether we want, because it's likely to be portrayed by the Republicans that we want more representation of our democratic ideologies on the panel, which is not true. However, if we clearly pointed out after getting once we've been elected, when we pack the court, if we clearly pointed out that we want an equal representation on this supposedly bipartisan panel, it is that narrative falls short. Secondly, I think we can agree that we have like two goals as a Democratic Party, which has been like agreed by both the opposition and the government. That firstly, we want to like obviously want to get re-elected, and secondly, we also want to enforce our policies, enforce the inclusive policies that align with our democratic values. Right. So like opposition tells you that it actually hurts our chances of getting reelected, how we're less likely to see long-term change if we like make this move. That is so not true. They tell you that it is like mutually exclusive. It is not mutually exclusive to have House representation, because like it is mutually exclusive to have House representation and like get a greater packing the court. We tell you that is not true because yeah, it is. Hang on. Oh God. Okay. Yeah. It is not mutually exclusive because, oh my God. Right, they fail to, hang on, my notes are so confusing. All right, yeah, it is like, it's not gonna like benefit us in the long term because like, even though if we have a lot of House representation, even if we set a legal precedent, well, even if we set a policy precedent, what happens is like if it is very easy for the Conservatives to come and repeal those policies, and as a result, like even the policies that we've had in the past are not likely to be like enforced by the court, because recognizing that it is equally important for the court to enforce these policies. Like we can go on to make policies, but as long as they're not being enforced, it falls short of the goals that we have. Like packing the court and having an equal representation of political ideologies allows for these policies to be enforced, which is something that we do not see happening. Even if we set like legal precedents, it is not going to happen as long as we pack the court. All right. All right, they tell you that it is like better to like shorten the term of the judges. We tell you that it contradicts their very nature, because again, it is something that is going to like essentially goes against the constitutional processes. Right, so we tell you that because if we do not make this move, what is likely to happen in the future is that we're going to still like remain with the higher Conservative representation on the Supreme Court judges panel, and as a result, the policies that even if Democrats continue to pass the policies that align with their values, they're not likely to be enforced. They're like rulings aligning with those policies are not likely to be made. So like there's not going to be the kind of long-term change that we see the opposition proposing. Rather, it is better to have even the policies that we had in the past, those enforced before we go on to like make more better policies for the future, because that is also something that we can use as a political campaign next time, telling the people that we're able to like protect the kind of policies that we have, and also make better inclusive policies in the House. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for a great round of debate. I'm going to deliberate. Y'all can stay on the call, and then I will return and give you a call. Yes, you're recording. Oh, okay, great. Recording's back on. Okay. Sup, everybody. I think that there's a lot to learn from this round. I'm going to give you my call. I'm going to give you my RFD, and then I'm going to give you some feedback. I think that actually, let me set a timer so that way I don't talk for too long. Okay, so I give the round to Op for several reasons. I'm going to go through them. First, I'm going to tell you what it is that like I get from the teams in this round. And then I'm going to explain to you how I weighed them. And then I'm going to explain to you where I think each team could have been better, because I think both teams in this round could have provided far stronger cases with honestly very like limited effort. Because I think the frustrating thing about listening to this round was like you were all kind of getting it correct, conceptions of what it should be about, and then saying the conception, but then just like repeating the conception with limited analysis. So it was like you're there, but like you're not, so let me tell you what I get and how I think these points could have been easily expanded, right? Because from government, I get like a pretty simple case starting from the PM that I think is like good and like the correct kind of like line of thinking, right? Like the court will function better if it's balanced, because like you'll have better discourse that will be inherently less politicized. I think that this point could have been drastically expanded upon, right? I think like there could be points made on this on how it could be easier for like conservative justices to justify supporting leftist decisions because now there's more leftists on the court who could be persuading them, how they have to like be polite to their colleagues, which is going to lead to them to like vote on left on certain issues just for like the sake of feasibility. I think there's like tons of lenses that you could have used to expand upon why it is really likely that this court will make more progressive decisions than it is comparatively in status quo. This is like feedback that didn't play into the RFD, but I'm explaining the fact that that was not included in terms of the impacts gotten, right? Instead, all I really get as an impact from this point is that there will generally be probably a better court function. And I kind of believe this. And then you also tell me, and then I think also like how that's applied could be expanded, right? Because you tell me like it's going to be a balanced court and that's all we're going to do. But what you don't tell me, what I think would have been really critical to include in this is like how the Democrats could use that as a political strategy, right? Like I think a big part of why I think opposition takes this round is opposition comes up and they say, listen, the Democrats are do this and they're going to get fucked in elections, right? Because the Republicans are going to say that they're manipulating like the entire judicial system to get their way, and people are probably going to believe them, and they're never going to get people elected in a majority in the House or the Senate again in the future, all of which is like pretty no bueno for the Democratic Party, who is like the key operator in this round. But I think that that could have been a really like prevented line of argumentation if you guys had just been like, look, the Democrats are just doing this for balance. They can argue that in the media, they can argue that in the Senate, et cetera, and say this is just about balance because the Republicans have been manipulating the court for a really long time and like packing courts at lower levels. So only conservative justices are making it to the Supreme Court. And this is a correction of that. And I think arguing on that line could have really strengthened your point. And also undercut a lot of op material. Obviously, there's other arguments you could have also run for that. Like, I think there's a variety of lenses that you could take there, but I think that that's one strategy that could have substantially strengthened your case. Specifically, I mention it because it very logically flows from the very smart model that Yuvica brings in the PM, which is like, this is just equalizing the court politically, right? You could say the Democrats could even talk about in government, right, into legislation, like the court's just going to have like 6 liberal spots, 6 conservative spots, and that's what it's going to be for the future, right? Like, I think this logically flows from the model and arguments you give. You just don't explicitly say it. So what I get from opposition, I get this point on feasibility issues that I think is deeply unimportant, so I didn't really consider that. But then I get this idea that the Republicans will use this to justify packing courts in the future to unbalance them and to get a ton of conservative justices on them. I don't get a lot of pushback. I just gave examples of pushback a second ago that like government could have given on how to argue that this wouldn't happen. So instead, I just got this very strong argumentation that like as soon as Republicans get into office, you give me lots of reasons as to why Republicans are probably going to get into office as a majority very soon, are definitely going to do this. That seems likely, which means all of the progress that government is talking about is very limited in scope, and is likely to change in the future. And if I value human rights as government tells me I should, presumably that's bad because it means all the bad shit they're talking about is just going to happen. It might happen in 4 years, but it's definitely going to happen then, which isn't good. And you also talk about how this will hurt the Democrats' long-term political goals. I already talked about this, but I found that to be a very persuasive argument, right? Because it's pointing out, especially because this House is a Democratic Party, why like the Democratic Party will be harmed. Presumably, as the Democratic Party, I value the fact that I'm never getting another majority for a substantial period of time. I probs don't like that. I found that argument persuasive. So it was kind of like on that basis in like the world in which you're packing the court, maybe you get things good for a couple years, but presumably by the next election cycle, you have tons of Republicans getting into office. They will pack the court with conservative justices. Government doesn't really have any positive long-term impacts. The round goes to opposition for proving like a lot of negative harms. In terms of like additional feedback beyond just like case lines to run, I think every speaker in this round could have worked on time management. A lot of you / all of you spend really substantial time on your introductions. Your introduction, like unless it's like deeply critical to your case. So I guess like the one person this isn't true for would probably be like Yuvica, who actually give the model and that stuff. That was like obviously necessary for the case. But everyone else could have shortened it substantially because a lot of you are saying things that are in your constructive anyway, but you don't cut it out of your constructive. You just repeat it there. So you functionally just wasted a lot of your time. Secondarily, I think at Gov, I think you also could have like engaged more in the spirit of the motion, and also you could have engaged a lot more with your crossbends. As I think should have been clear from my RFD, a big portion of why you lose this round isn't because your arguments were bad. Your arguments were good, even if they needed to be fleshed out and analyzed more. But you don't really refute opposition in a substantial enough way, especially at their key material, in order to like take them out of this debate. That's like a really critical part of the round. And you also don't like weigh out, I think, like, and you also don't weigh out generously either, right? Like, I think you need to take your crossbench at their best, and then be like, even in their best world, why are we still beating them? And you don't really do that, so it's hard for me to then weigh on that line. Yeah, I already talked about the arguments that most applied to, so I won't reiterate them because I know that gets really annoying when judges do that. Yeah, I also think you could have done more to like analyze and show why it's likely to happen that the Democrats, like when they balance the court, like it will be likely that people would see it that way. I know I kind of already said that. Yeah, okay, cool. And that could have like acted as refutation to the opposition's point on court manipulation. Opposition. I think you should have done a better job to make sure your case was comparative on like the major issues. It was, I think, contentious for most of this round whether or not like most of your case was relevant, in the sense that like you're talking about something that might not necessarily be mutually exclusive. You do demonstrate to me why it is mutually exclusive later on, but I think it's better if that material comes out like earlier, like slash as early as possible, slash when you bring the point on getting people into Congress and the Senate, it should be explained to me quite clearly at the origin of that point why that is mutually exclusive. I also think sometimes you guys do stray from like the scope of this round in terms of like your relevant analysis. Like, for example, Ben, when you bring up like Puerto Rico and DC becoming a state, like that was fun for me to hear, but it wasn't like critical to the round. I think make sure that you're devoting your time to the stuff that you need to prove to win. Yeah. If anybody else wants more feedback, feel free to let me know. If you have questions on the call or like, I don't know, anything, my thoughts on the US Supreme Court, let me know. Otherwise, like, y'all are free.